Story 1. It is not the studios that are the problem. It is distribution. This is not a Disney and American Broadcasting Company matter. It is Nexstar. They can create their own media company all day, but it will not matter if distributors refuse to air their content. For those who say they should just run their own show on a streaming service, Google owns YouTube, Amazon owns Twitch, and Apple has made its position clear. Brendan Carr, chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, has threatened to revoke licenses for publishing content he personally dislikes. That is how Jimmy Kimmel was removed. These companies are unlikely to become champions of free speech if it cuts into their quarterly earnings. Boycotting Disney, the American Broadcasting Company, and Hulu will be only marginally impactful. This came from the Federal Communications Commission, which threatened to pull all Disney media off the air unless Disney complied. Pressure your members of Congress to do something about this government overreach. Story 2. They do not even need to. They can just make a podcast and put it on YouTube. I do not see why these people were ever willing to be beholden to networks. Story 3. Myers has at least 2 podcasts. Jon Stewart has the weekly show and may still have a behind-the-scenes version. I don't remember the real name. I expect more podcasts to appear. This is not a startup in a crowded industry. Story 4. Given that the Federal Communications Commission threatened to pull licenses, I would say it would simply be a matter of not getting off the ground. They would have to remain entirely online until digital identification and complete control of the internet are in place to oust them again. Story 5. John Oliver called it Strike Force 5 or Force 5 Strike Again. Story 6. Distribution is the problem. Broadcast television and services such as Hulu will not work. YouTube and Google are options until they are pressured by the government. Hosting content on a website or application is an option until the government shuts that down as well. Study what has worked for people who successfully overthrew authoritarian governments during the internet era. You may find something useful. Story 7. It is time for non-United States-based media to break through. Just as other countries did in the past to obtain United States channels, we need to bring in international channels that, frankly, are tearing the United States apart. Story 8. Trump has essentially weaponized the Federal Communications Commission. You cannot broadcast without a license, and he is more than willing to revoke it. Story 9. You do not live in a democracy with freedom of speech anymore. Any attempt to create a media company opposed to Trump will be suppressed by the Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service, and the people behind it will be prohibited from using bank accounts and sued for harmful misinformation. Story 10. There used to be something called pirate radio. We need that again, but for television. Story 11. They could start podcasts or YouTube channels at any time, and they probably will, but their audience will be only a fraction of that of broadcast networks. Story 12. We would be much better off if Stewart and Colbert got over their fear and ran for office. The United States has proven that it is willing to elect celebrities, so we should use that tendency to get some of the few good ones into power and fix what Donald Trump has broken. They would both be far better than someone like Gavin Newsom. Story 13. Nonprofit, fully transparent, cooperative media and news agency. Story 14. Then they would be self-employed, and they could pretty much say anything that is legal without facing consequences. Story 15. The people who paid them have far more wealth and orange-skinned friends in high places. Aside from the rich being put on the menu, things look bleak. Story 16. There is a video of a woman yelling at Kash Patel in public yesterday, calling him out for defending pedophiles. Americans, that is your playbook against Trump's media crackdown. Confront them head-on where possible. Force them to hear you out. Capture every moment on video. Post it far and wide. Watch them sweat. Story 17. They would be known for the failure of that media company rather than for their on-camera presence. The talent does not always need to produce. Story 18. So the question is YouTube next? Even Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, and others have their shows available on YouTube as secondary content, usually as clips rather than full episodes. Story 19. The world would be better if we could get legitimate news and these outlets on non-cable platforms, but ultimately the government wields enormous power over all platforms. Relying on Google, Spotify, Microsoft, Amazon, and others is difficult because these distribution platforms need government approval for many of their actions. You could create your own platform like Nebula. That is possible, but what happens when the Trump administration or Visa and MasterCard target your payment processor? Move to a safe country? You may still face third-party interference from the United States. It is probably worth trying, but it is not a small undertaking. You need technical talent and deep pockets to get it off the ground, and you must be willing and able to face huge risks in doing so. Even having a billionaire patron carries the risk that the patron will draw the ire of the government. Elon Musk is many things, but he learned quickly that the President of the United States has real power that hundreds of billions of dollars do not protect you from. Story 20. It is accelerating the decline of broadcast or, on some level, the move towards state-run television. Currently, the future of television appears to be YouTube until regulators find a way to treat it like traditional television. Story 21. If they created a media company together, it would likely be an independent platform that blends comedy, satire, and journalism. They would not have to rely on mainstream networks or face corporate pressure. It could give new comedians and writers a major opportunity. However, the challenge would be managing so many strong personalities under a single vision. Story 22. Content-wise, nothing would change. However, since Colbert had the largest viewership but still lost millions of dollars, his media company would go bankrupt in short order. Story 23. Creating media is one thing, distributing it is another. If they do not have TV stations or a platform like YouTube or Spotify, how do they distribute it? They could build their own platform, but they need experts to do that. Story 24. What do you mean exactly? Nothing would be different. These people hardly have a significant societal impact. Story 25. I said this last night. What if the Big Five started a network, charged $1 to $2, and got their friends to invest in a streaming platform? Story 26. Stop paying for their bullshit. Consumer boycotts might be all we have when political dissent is crushed. Story 27. We should avoid networks and focus on independent media. Seek diverse news sources such as ground news. Independent media companies can make apps or use YouTube. It is not impossible, but we must ensure our money goes to independent media outlets rather than to distributor-controlled networks. Story 28. For starters, they would probably have to settle for much lower salaries. People are focused mainly on the political aspects for good reasons, but the television and studio companies are trying to make money. You might wonder why there is so much reality television. Because it is cheap to produce. Paying a late-night television host large sums of money for a format that is declining is not good for the books. If they created their own company, they would largely be working for free. Story 29. Why is it so hard to understand that a company that broadcasts locally throughout the country does not want an employee who could cause a loss of money or viewership? Story 30. Not going to happen, ever. No broadcaster will work with them because the administration will target anyone who does. If they stay exclusively online and stream, the administration will pressure internet service providers to throttle speeds and will pressure advertisers that run advertisements for them. You do not realize where this is headed. Any dissent will be drowned out by force. Story 31. I do not think they are popular enough to support a media company that would gain any real traction. Story 32. They would have just been in Leatherface's MAHA wellness camps a few weeks earlier. Story 33. They will fail. The shows are not profitable, and their viewership is declining. Story 34. They would still have to obtain a license from the Federal Communications Commission under President Trump, which would require bootlicking, as Disney and the American Broadcasting Company are doing. Story 35. They say they would love to open a golf course and spend all their time playing golf, but they actually spend 80 hours a week doing the books, putting out fires, and everything other than playing golf. If they opened their own media company, they would not have the time to produce the content we all love. Story 36. These people are not funny, though. I think people watch them only because it is what is being made. I cannot imagine anyone tuning in just to hear their drivel. Story 37. There was briefly a podcast called The Five with all the late-night hosts. But with the Federal Communications Commission acting like a state media apparatus now, It will be hard to get liberal content on television for a decade or two. That is why the 1980s led to the rise of home box office. We had to buy edgier, smarter shows to escape Reagan era and Full House drivel. It reminds me of the Mr. Show sketch where the old people take over, asking, "Why can't television be nice?" For the nice people. They then electrocute performers who are not bland. Story 38. It would be like Air America, the progressive talk radio station. Story 39. Are they not all on television at about the same time, competing against each other? Story 40. I would say it is really good. I just wonder where they are going to get the money for it. Story 41. The outlook is bleak. Podcasts depend on syndication. If Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or Google Podcasts back out, it would be as if podcasts didn't exist. Every way of consuming media is syndicated in one way or another. This convenience has been built for decades and is not changing soon. Story 42. It would be like when Bill Simmons started The Ringer after he was fired from the entertainment and sports programming network. It was hard to stand out and make an impact from near scratch. Story 43. They can all start a podcast. Conan did, and he has been incredibly successful. Story 44. It was dead in the water the second the Federal Communications Commission pulled its broadcast license or never granted one. Assuming, of course, it was intended for television. Story 45. Home box office should fully commit and start airing more late-night programming. They already have John Oliver and Bill Maher. It is not my cup of tea, but whatever. They could disrupt this space if they have the will to do so. Story 46. We'd have The Avengers of Sarcasm as a primetime show. Instead of saving the world, they'd be roasting it. Story 47. Sorry, I cannot assist with content that encourages or celebrates someone's death. I can, however, rewrite this for text-to-speech without that language. If Comedy Central can run South Park, it could run a rotating show with these hosts and guests, including David Letterman, Craig Ferguson, Samantha Bee, and other funny people. They are wealthy and older, so working a bit less might be fine, especially if it is temporary. Call it waiting for Donald J. Trump to step down. Story 48. It would not be different because it would be bankrupt within a year. Just ask Al Gore. Story 49. It would just be a male version of The View. No one needs that. Story 50. The issue is not the studios but the distributors. This is not about Disney and the American Broadcasting Company. It is Nexstar. You can create all the content you want, but if no one airs it, it is dead on arrival. Story 51. How about working for a media company owned by Matt and Trey? Story 52. They would be imprisoned and stoned to death in the newly paved Rose Garden. Story 53. Honestly, late-night television is dying. I'd rather see them embrace a podcast model online or live streaming. Story 54. If they secured financial backing, it would be popular at first because of left-wing support, but within a few months no one would care and they would abandon the project. I could be wrong. None of them are funny enough. The only one with intelligence and courage is Jon Stewart. I doubt he could carry them long-term, especially since he thinks for himself more than producers or politicians would like. Story 55. They can create as many media companies and be as raucous as they want, but the main obstacle is distribution. They will not be allowed on major streaming platforms such as Netflix, Apple Television Service, or other mainstream outlets. This would not pass the review boards given the level of corruption in those processes. They could start their own online distribution, but we know how insecure Trump is, and he could get United States internet service providers to block them. That has been done with pornography. Story 56. Jimmy Kimmel did not fit with the other hosts. His personality and sense of humor are different. He changed and conformed to keep his show, and later began hosting awards shows. He created The Man Show. That mindset is still there, but he now conceals it to make money. Story 57. Nobody watches these clowns. The American Broadcasting Company was waiting to pull the plug on Jimmy Kimmel. He has been unpopular for years. He finally gave them a reason to do so. Story 58. Who will fund them and who will air their content? Now you are right back where you started. Story 59. Retirement. I agree with Kimmel politically, but he has not been funny since The Man Show. Story 60. It would immediately go bankrupt because not enough people watched it to begin with. Story 61. The Trump administration would just pressure that company instead. Story 62. They submitted their form for Federal Communications Commission approval, and it stopped there. Story 63. They need a license, and the threat of losing it caused the company to drop Kimmel. Why would they approve a license for Kimmel after just getting rid of him? Story 64. Given that they are agents of the corporate media, my answer is not at all. We would merely have one more of what we already have far too much of. Story 65. Why are people still watching cable? You are giving these clowns curation power. Story 66. Based on the events of September 17th, if those people were to create a media company, the administration would declare the company part of a network promoting radical leftist violence, shut the company down, and imprison everyone named. Story 67. I would love to see all of them come together and use their name recognition to uplift voices that are not straight, white, or cisgender men. I have seen them do this in the past, and I think they would be excellent at it in the future. Story 68. Cool. Then they would all be in one centralized place where I can avoid them. Story 69. Even if they formed their own media company, they would still need distributors to air their content, and the Federal Communications Commission, currently under Trump's control with his ally in charge, would make it very difficult for them. They would have to produce content for online platforms like YouTube instead, which have significantly smaller audiences, or go the cable route. John Oliver's show, Last Week Tonight, might be the last talk show left that will criticize Trump, and that is because home box office has his support. For all the Make America Great Again supporters who talk about the Constitution and free speech, this is what authoritarianism looks like. But they do not care because Own the Libs is all that Fox News influenced viewers care about now. Story 70. If Stewart, Colbert, Kimmel, and Myers ran their own media company, news would be funnier, sharper, and much more savage. Forget cable, this would be the Netflix of satire, shaping opinions while making you laugh out loud. Story 71. They would have much smaller podcast-type shows, which bring in 1/5 of the revenue but incur 1/100th of the expenses. Most of them were long-standing money losers that the networks are abandoning in their current form. Story 72. It would be a tiny version of YouTube catering to a blue sky audience. Story 73. Make America Great Again supporters would call it left-wing propaganda, all the while listening to people like Alex Jones, Laura Loomer, and Nick Sorter. Story 74. Microsoft National Broadcasting Company already exists. They would just cannibalize each other's audience. Story 75. Since none of them are runny, it would be a money-losing endeavor. Story 76. Dumb propaganda on their side, the same as it has always been. Story 77. Kimmel would rather rely on the taxpayer-funded Affordable Care Act than pay the hospital bills for his child himself, despite being wealthy. Story 78. Jon Stewart would rather run for president than risk his reputation by creating a media company with those bozos. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.